Reza Aslan, your new series, Believer, on CNN continues your lifelong journey to learn about the world's religions. Tell us a little bit about how this show got started.
This is a show that I've been wanting to do for a really long time. In fact, I was pitching it all around town for a little while when I discovered that a production company at the time, Berman Braun, now Whale Rock, was pitching something similar. And so we just kind of went in together. And once that happened, it was actually a pretty easy sell. In fact, I sometimes joke it was like the shortest pitch, in history. We walked into the CNN offices. I said, "Hey, you know Bourdain?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "How about faith instead of food?" And they said, "We'll take it."
Well, well, what's interesting about the show is the way that it not only explores religions, but the way that religions tie into the various cultures. In fact, you said something in the first episode about how religion is embedded in culture. Can you explain that?
Well, I mean, not to belabor the metaphor, but Bourdain's is not really about food. It's about the window that food opens into culture. And our show is very much the same, though, of course, religion is so much more intimately connected to culture. It's so much about identity. And I think that's where we always began, with this one notion that religion, beyond the beliefs and the practices, is first and foremost a matter of identity. When someone says, "I am Christian, I am Muslim, I am Jewish," they're not telling you what they believe. They're telling you who they are. And so that's our guiding philosophy, is that, it is a show about faith and about practice and belief and all that stuff. But ultimately, it's about different worldviews, and it's about how people think and the connections that you may not really realize that you have with people who look different than you, who pray differently than you do, who call God by a different name, and yet who seem to share very much the same values and hopes and dreams and aspirations and fears and all that stuff that you happen to share.
And each episode focuses on a specific faith and unique locale. Can you talk a bit about why that was the right structure for the show?
Yeah, and in fact, what we really wanted to do was to kind of step outside the box a little bit. We wanted to focus on religions that were either a bit on the margins or that were misunderstood, mischaracterized, religions that people probably already had opinions about, like voodoo or Scientology, and to try to challenge those perceptions by getting to know these followers, and particularly by me immersing myself in these religious communities. The idea being that, you may start out an episode of Believer looking at someone who seems exotic and foreign and weird and scary, someone who seems like they're about a million miles away from you in terms of the way that they understand the world. And then through the next 44 minutes, as you see me immerse myself in that religious community, hopefully what you recognize is that you have a lot more in common than you think that you did. And so that's how we did it. And I think particularly now, as we start, conceiving of what a second season would look like, we've really taken that to heart and decided, we're going to continue that. We're going to, I always say, we're never going to do a show on Catholicism in the Vatican. We might do a show on Catholicism in Iceland and how different it is from what you think Catholicism is. But that's kind of our mandate, right? We're not interested in fringe or weird. We've been, accused of exoticism, but that's not our goal. Our goal is to show you something that you may not be familiar with and to make it familiar.
You talk about challenging expectations. Taking, for instance, the episode about Scientology, which I was very interested to watch as someone who lives in Los Angeles. You really do present a unique perspective on that. You're not just making fun of it, as I'm sure a lot of people are want to do. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. Oh, this is my son, Cyrus. What's wrong, honey? Oh, he did? That is not okay. On purpose? Oh, no, that is not okay. I'll tell you what. Will you do me a favor? Will you go sit down in that bed for a minute, and I'll come and help you in 1 minute. Okay. My son.
Very, very cute kid.
Thank you. Yeah, my other son bit him.
Oh no.
Sweetheart, if you try to be quiet, I'll come and help you in 1 second. Live. There you go. I'm sorry. What was the question?
About challenging expectations, particularly in regard with like Scientology, for instance.
That's a great example, right? I feel like everybody in America has an opinion on Scientology, but few people actually know anything about what the religion is. Yeah, they know about the controversies, the accusations. Excuse me 1 moment.
Oh no.
I need you to try to be quiet if you can, okay? Thank you. You know, they know about the accusations, the issues of corruption and abuse, all of which, you know, we do not dismiss by any means. But we're interested in beliefs and believers and what it is that people actually believe. Why do people, despite everything that you think you know about Scientology, continue to believe it? And in particular, why do those who have left the church because of all those reasons continue to practice the religion? And that was by far our most watched show, and I think it's the show that really blew the most minds, because I think for a lot of people, they had never thought that way about Scientology. And I think that was episode 4 for us. And I really noticed, just in kind of tracking the commentary that the show was getting, that that was the show where people started to understand what it was that we were doing. You know, the first few shows, the first couple of episodes, they were just kind of along for the ride and enjoying it. But by around the Scientology episode, you really got that people were saying, aha, I get it. You are forcing me, whether I want to or not, to rethink my perceptions. And that's what I've always thought that, you know, the TV has had the power to do, whether it's scripted or non-scripted. That's why I'm in the TV business.
And in each one of these episodes, you you meet a lot of interesting people, and have a lot of interesting experiences. Some of them a little bit hair-raising. Think about the episode where you go to India and have the run-in with I forget the name of who he is, but
the Baba, the Agori Baba.
Yes, Agori. Yes, when you're drinking out of the skull and all that.
Give me 1 second. Hold on.
Oh no, go ahead.
You go upstairs. Show it to me. No. Come here now. Okay, this is what happens when you have 3 sons. One of them just had a bloody nose.
Oh no. Well, that's 2 down. 1 more to go.
Yeah, 1 more to go. Yeah, we might hear from the other one in a moment here. Yes, the Agori Baba. Yes, I'm sorry. You were saying?
Right. Yeah. Take us into those moments where you're confronted with something like that.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I have basically a kind of unspoken deal that I make with these communities. You know, many of whom are, of course, secretive and a little bit closed off, you know, and certainly not very trusting of the media, you know. And here I come with my cameras, and you know, and I'm saying, can I be a part of you? It's a tough thing to ask, and so I make a fairly simple deal, which is, let me in, and I'll be yours. I'll do what you tell me to do. You know, I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to criticize. I'm here to experience. Now, I will be honest about my emotions. If I don't like something, I'll say it. If I'm scared, I'll say it. I'm not a good enough actor to hide that kind of stuff. But, you know, the deal is, let me in, and I'll be in. And sometimes that gets a little out of hand, as you noticed in that India episode, where, you know, I did not know what I had gotten myself into. And if you know the episode, there's a point where I call the director over and try to get out of it, and he won't allow it. He forces me to continue with the scene. Mm-hmm. And afterwards, I told him, I said, you know, why didn't you stop that? And he said, I thought you were kidding. I realized, oh, we don't have a safe word, which is something we fixed. We now have a safe word. But it's, you know, a lot of people saw that moment A lot of people laughed. A lot of people were scared. Some people were offended. Some people were just confused. And that's okay. All those emotions are real emotions because, it was a moment of uncertainty for every one of us. We didn't know what we were getting into. Now, I do think that what's important to understand is what happens after that moment, which is, my desire to actually understand the idea behind these actions, these spectacular displays of self-pollution, but in a different context. And fortunately, we find it in a different context. And I think that arc, confronting something, seeing it, in a sort of an extreme form, and then pulling the faith out of the practice, and then finding a way in which that faith is actually practiced in a way that is positive, that I think people can gravitate towards. That's in many ways the arc of the whole season.
Yeah, and I think that's really the extraordinary thing about the show, is the way in which you are able to empathize with people who are different than you are, and to understand that even though your beliefs may be a tad different, we're really not so different.
And my whole thing is, like, if I can get you to do that in 44 minutes on a TV show, maybe I can get you to do that in your neighborhood and in your world. Maybe people that you thought were so different than you aren't as different than you. It may be too much to ask for a TV show. I get that, but it's the tool that I have at my disposal, and I'm going to use it for that end.
On a very surface level, the show is really well produced. There's a cinematic quality to it, especially when you're capturing all of these different locales. Can you talk a bit about the crew that you work with, and how you guys work to show off the beauty and uniqueness of these environments?
Well, what's funny is when we first started putting this show together, we honestly didn't know what we were doing. I mean, nothing like this has ever been attempted before. There are shows about religion in which somebody stands in front of people doing religious stuff and says, "Look at those people, aren't they interesting?" And there are shows about other cultural aspects like food or music or whatever, but there just isn't a show like this. And no one has ever actually attempted something that's immersive in this space before. So because we didn't know what we were doing, we wanted to make sure that we had the same crew for everything. So we had a single director for all 6 episodes, great director from New York, Ben Selkow. We had the same DPs for every single episode. That's not how a lot of these shows work, right? I mean, a lot of these shows have, teams, and they're interchangeable, and they go, off, and they come back and they go to the next place. We were a unit of 4 that stuck together for every minute of every episode. And I think that really changed it for us. That allowed us to create a signature for the show, not just to figure out what the show is, but to create a signature for it that people have really gravitated towards. I mean, it is, even the diehard haters of the show, and there are a lot of them, even the haters of the show have to admit it's gorgeous. It's just a beautifully shot, beautifully produced show, and we're really proud of that.
It absolutely is. I wanted to talk a bit about your background, because I mean, you are a religious scholar. You've got several degrees, a PhD. What was it about religion that fascinated you so much and made you want to make a career out of studying it?
Oh, that's a good question. I was born in Iran. I was born to a fairly secular Muslim family. I was 7 years old when the Iranian Revolution happened. And so I was able to see, with my own eyes, the power that religion has to transform societies for good and for bad. And I think that it never left me. It sort of seared itself in my consciousness. And when we moved to the US, this was a time of profound anti-Muslim sentiment. So we more or less just scrubbed our lives of Islam. We just tried our best to put our heads down and fit in as much as possible. But I've always maintained this profound interest in religion and spirituality, and religious history and phenomenology, and all those aspects of it, mythologies, things like that. They just really turned me on. And I went to college in order to be a writer. That was my goal. But I'm also an immigrant, and when you tell your immigrant parents that you're going to college to be a writer, they look at you like you're from Mars. Like, what do you mean? Nobody. My mom said, nobody is stopping you from writing. Go get a job and then write whenever you want to. So I thought, well, okay, maybe I'll pursue academics, and I took a couple of religion courses and not just fell in love with it, but realized that I was good at it. I think the thing that turned me on most about religion as an academic discipline, and this is probably surprising for a lot of people, is that it's the perfect degree for someone who can't choose in the humanities. It's like, well, I love history, but I also love art, and I love archaeology, and anthropology is fun. Well, just do them all by doing religion. Like, that's because it encompasses all of those aspects. Which is why, like, my wife always makes fun of me for being such a know-it-all. It's like, well, but I had to study everything in order to focus on this thing. But I will say that one thing that I understood pretty early on in my academic career is that I don't want to be an academic. I mean, it's just the worst. I mean, academia is just, a place of just petty jealousies, and it's stifling. It's the kind of place where not only do they discourage reaching out to a popular audience beyond, the ivory tower, but they actually punish it. So, when I was done with all my degrees and stuff, I thought, I'm going to, here's my philosophy. I find this stuff interesting. And if I find it interesting, I assume other people will find it interesting. It's just that I got to figure out a way to get them to bother with it, to actually learn about it. And the only way to do that is to make it fun and accessible, and to put it in story form, to put it on television. And that's basically what I've done my entire career. I get a lot of shit from fellow academics as a result. Like, oh, you're not being serious. You're dumbing it down. You're making it simple. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing, because I want to communicate to everyone else, not just my 4 students.
And you mentioned a season 2. What would that look like for you guys? I guess you're still in the middle of season 1. Is that right?
No, so season 1 is done now.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It was it exceeded everybody's expectations. It exceeded our expectations insofar as audience goes, but we loved, and me especially, because I just get off on this stuff, the way that it entered the zeitgeist in a way. People like the Atlantic and the New Yorker and the New York Times, and people were writing not about the show, but about what the show means and what it represents. Is this something that can even be done? And a lot of it was critical, and I loved it. I love seeing pieces by people saying, no, TV can't change people's minds, because at the very least, it's a proof that we're starting a debate, starting a discussion. And of course, for a network like CNN, they love that stuff. They thrive on the whole notion of debate and dialogue and people coming from different points of view. So they were extraordinarily happy with it. So were we. So we're not going to really mess with the format very much. But we have an almost endless list of religious communities, and we're just going to pick the next ones that we want to do and just go, head on. Now, especially now that we know what we're actually doing, which is kind of nice. Like, honestly, I remember those first couple of months of pre-production in season 1, where often we would just turn to each other and say, what exactly is this show again? I feel like now we know. And so now it's just a matter of going and doing some more.
Well, it's a great show, and I look forward to seeing more of it. Reza Aslan, thank you so much, and congratulations.
Thank you, and thank you for putting up with my children.
Oh, no problem. I hope they all get over their injuries.
Well, I have 3 boys, so they routinely beat the crap out of each other. So it's
I have a younger brother too, so I know what that's like.
Yeah, regular day in the Aslan household.
Well, thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.